Policy change is possible and often comes with a steep price, writes Kennedy Stewart. The policy change Stewart is talking about is the decriminalizing of small amounts of certain illicit drugs for personal use, which took effect in Vancouver on January 31st of this year. The steep price to which the now former mayor refers is losing his job in last year's municipal election. That is the case he makes in his new book, Decrim, How We Decriminalized Drugs in Vancouver. So they say history is usually written by the victor. So is it your place to A, be the one to tell this story, and B, say what lost you the election?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this whole thing is much bigger than me. I think that the election is one thing we can talk about, but the much bigger issue is the one person a day who's still dying of from illicit poison drugs here in the city, and the six that are dying provincially every day, or the 26 that are dying across Canada. So happy to talk about Vancouver politics, but I think it's much more important to talk about this important step forward in the in drug policy reform. And in some ways, I think I'm the only person that can really tell this story, because I was an insider on the whole bit of it from the federal provincial level. And there's not too many folks that want to talk about it. So that's why I put it in this book.
Now, when we talk about Decrim and last year's municipal election, would you appreciate the fact that there may be other factors at play here? COVID-19, street crime, homelessness, your opponent's law and order agenda, his alliance with the Vancouver Police Union. Isn't it a bit neat and tidy to say any one thing lost you the election?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't say that. I think it's a factor. I think it played a factor in the election loss. I do think, and you can still see it rippling out across Canada right now, and of course around the world, is that drug policy reform is a kind of third rail of politics, and if you touch it, people are very concerned, I think, about deaths in their communities, overdoses, and all that goes along with that. But then, in terms of change, it's very difficult to affect, and I think everyone who was directly involved in this policy at the federal, provincial, or local level have all been moved to different positions, or in fact are out of politics. So it really was a difficult undertaking. I think necessary. I think it's still small, though. I still think that decriminalizing drugs won't be a cure-all by any means for what we're going through here, but it's an important first step.
And the book, of course, gives a quick run through of your political career from MP to mayor. When did Decrim become part of the plan, and did your thinking on the subject evolve over time?
Yeah. So really, drug policy wasn't really on my radar at all when I became a federal politician in 2011. That's because the prime minister at the time was Stephen Harper, and he was ramping up the war on drugs. Minimum sentences for drug possession. Remember, you'd have a minimum sentence if you were caught with 6 cannabis plants. So that was kind of what we were fighting against during that period. Then when Trudeau came in with cannabis legalization, I mean, that was if you remember back to the 2015 election, that was a huge pivot for the Liberal Party, and in fact really helped propel Trudeau to his majority at that time. So drug policy really, I mean, as a professor here in Vancouver during the early 2000s, of course, there was the supervised consumption site that, I was involved in that debate with Larry Campbell and others. And I have a lot of friends who work in that profession in terms of saving lives. So it always had been on my radar. But as mayor, the prime minister had said right to my face, I'm never going to decriminalize drugs. So I thought early on that it was impossible really to do much. I did work a lot on safer supply, which had some possibilities, but early on in my mayoralty, Decrim just, I'd said publicly, and it's in the book, I'd said to media, though, there's no way this is going to happen, so I'm not going to work on it.
One of the more candid moments in the book, if we want to call it that, is how you describe the working relationship, or lack thereof, between the mayor's office and the Oregon government. How would you define your relationship with the premier at the time?
Well, pretty well non-existent. John and I had a run-in over the Trans Mountain Pipeline. I was a huge opponent of that in my federal career. I was arrested, blockading work on Burnaby Mountain. And Horgan was a proponent for a long time for this pipeline. And I think that's where we got into early difficulties, probably as far back as 2014. And then, to my astonishment, really, through my time as mayor, I really talked to him just a handful of times, despite many, many issues we had to work on together. So I tried to work more through his ministers. For example, when David Eby became housing minister, that was like a window opened and sunshine started to come in because David was fantastic on housing. But no, I would characterize that relationship as very difficult, which was unfortunate because, remember, we were going through a pandemic and there was so much that we needed to coordinate it. But, my calls to the premier's office basically just went unheeded.
Well, there's a certain phone call where he hangs up on you, where you describe that in detail in the book. I guess is that sort of emblematic of the relationship then?
We didn't even get that far in most cases. He just simply really refused to talk to me, and which I think is really poor. I mean, we had to shut the city down. There was so much going on here in the city that we needed to coordinate. And I found my best allies were actually at the federal level. So at the beginning of COVID, where nobody knew anything, federal ministers were calling me every night saying, what can we do to help? And in fact, at the end of my term, we brought in about $1 billion for social housing, both from the provincial through David Eby and through Med Hussein, who was the housing minister at the time federally, because, you need to have those relationships. But the premier, Horgan wasn't interested at all. I don't know if it was a grudge or whatever, but that's really unfortunate and did hamper a lot of the work we were trying to do here at the city.
Now, you go into detail in the book as well about advocates not making your life easy either, almost like fighting a war on multiple fronts. Who was more difficult to deal with, council, the feds, the province, or the people you were trying to help?
Well, there was all levels of difficulty from all sides. On the council side, I think my right-wing opponents probably thought not much was going to happen here, so they were okay voting for things because they didn't think, we'd really accomplish much. So I think they, but the more progressive folks on council, the Green Party, One City, Cope, they were very supportive, pushing, very supportive here. But really, the decriminalization effort was really run out of the mayor's office. After we had a few votes on council, there wasn't really much for them to do. So surprisingly though, the folks that really kicked this off were the police. Drug users have been pushing for decriminalization forever, so we don't want to undermine that important work. But it was in, I think, 2018 that Chief Adam Palmer, the Vancouver Chief Constable here in Vancouver, was the head of the National Association of Police Chiefs. And they came out with a very important national report calling for the decriminalization of drugs. And then shortly after that, Dr. Bonnie Henry came out with a report saying that we needed to decriminalize drugs. And that made it to the federal level. Then Prime Minister Trudeau had appointed Patty Haydu as the health minister, who had worked in harm reduction in the past. And she called me up and said, look, our lawyers here at the federal lawyers have found a way for the city to go it alone and decriminalize drugs. Do you want to do this? And I said, sure. And we worked on it. So now drug users were difficult in some way. I mean, they were generally very, very in favor of decriminalization, but they were very skeptical of working with police on different steering committees. And also they wanted much, much higher threshold limits. Like right now you can carry about 2.5 grams of heroin or cocaine or get stopped by the police and not be arrested or have your drugs seized. But they wanted up to 10 times that amount in some cases, which just wasn't going to fly with anybody. So when they didn't get what they want, there was a lot of anger. And so you can see you're kind of walking with fire on both sides of the situation, and at all the same time, we're being attacked by, say, Pierre Poilievre and conservatives and then Canadians who are really don't want to talk about this. Like they know there's a problem. They wring their hands about it. They may have had a family member that's been affected, but moving into a new area is very scary for them. So there is also pushback there. So but I'm really glad we've got it off the ground now in the province, and that we have some of the best health scientists in the world monitoring how it's working, and we'll know after the 3 years how well it's done.
Now, you talk as well, you write in the book, powerful new groups opposed to decriminalization and other progressive policies had emerged to actively oppose my 2022 re-election bid, with Ken Sim gleefully jumping to the front of the parade, Pied Pipering his way to victory, playing Law and Order tunes. Get ready for Cruel Vancouver. Lots to unpack here, but in the months since since the election, would you say Cruel Vancouver has come to pass?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we saw early on, we saw things. For example, there's an art program in the downtown east side for people to make memorials for folks who have died from poison drugs. That funding was cut gleefully, with kind of some chest thumping that went on at council. But then we saw really the clearances on Hastings Street, hundreds of cops kind of walking down the street, taking people's possessions, throwing them in the garbage, and making it very difficult for the media to cover this. And if I was down Hastings yesterday, people are still there, just now they're unsheltered. So this kind of punishing people that we should be helping the most seems to be a theme of this council. The other is the closing of an overdose prevention site. Like, that's unheard of in the city. And so you can kind of build a list of punishing people that are the least well off. It's hard for folks to look at. I get that. People are saying, well, tourists will be scared away or whatever, but these are our brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers and folks who have had the worst lives that you can possibly imagine. And I think punching down is really the theme of this council, and it really just breaks my heart. And I do think Vancouverites, that COVID was hard on everybody, and there's still a lot of trauma that's involved with that. But when we step back and look at what we're actually doing to the folks that need the most help, I think we're going to be ashamed of ourselves.
Do you worry about the work you tried to do over those 4 years being undone by this particular mayor and council?
I think they can undo some surface stuff, but again, the $1 billion in social housing investment, like, that's all going forward. They will close some modular housing, unfortunately, but the more permanent structures that we purchased and have refurbished, hundreds and hundreds of better quality rooms for folks to live in, like that, you can't really get rid of that. Most of it's on city land, so unless you sold off the city land to private developers or something, but I don't even see this council having the kind of guts to do something that heinous. So, but I do think Vancouverites kind of have to demand more. And you got to remember too that most of the folks that are in difficulty are Indigenous. 40% of the folks living on the street are Indigenous. And when you talk to these folks, they're survivors of residential schools or all the trauma that goes along with that, the 60 scoop, and this is not a faceless group of people that you can just, ask the cops to move along. These are folks for which we have a lot of socially, we have responsibility for the situations that they're in. And to just, I just picture scenes I see in other cities where they're kind of water cannons and spraying people off of sidewalks. And, we don't want to go that direction. In fact, we probably have to continue building social housing, providing social supports, and really getting to grips with the toxic drug supply before you're going to see any improvement.
You say you hope the mayor proves you wrong. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, he you can see him taking his victory lap in the first year here, shotgunning beers on stage and kind of touring all over the place, and that's pretty common for rookie politicians. I mean, I saw that with Trudeau in 2015. He had a big victory lap as a prime minister, but then I think he rolled up his sleeves and started to get to work, and I really hope that Mr. Sim does that. He has a majority on council. He has no real excuse. He shows he's not scared to put huge income, property tax rises in. He put over almost an 11% property tax hike in his first year. So with that, you can do a lot of social good. But I don't really know what the guy's about. Like, I don't really know what he cares about. And that will become apparent over the next few years. He's even said that, he has five priorities. He won't tell anybody what they are, and then once he's done these five things, that he'll move on. I mean, he said this in a couple of interviews, and I think that's a very strange. I mean, I've been in politics, over a decade. I've kind of seen a lot. I'm a political scientist by training. Like, that's somebody that really has to come to grips quickly with why they have the most important job in the city and what they're going to do. And I hope it focuses on the most vulnerable people.
Well, since you brought it up, what goes through your mind when you see Ken Sim talking about bringing swagger back to the city or shotgunning a beer at a public event?
Yeah, it's somebody finding their feet. I mean, this is a very, very serious job. I mean, I remember when I had to declare the first state of emergency in the history of the city with COVID. We had the threat of anti-vaxxer truckers coming in. You sit at the chair of the police board. You also hear about terrorism events and other things. So it's not just about you having a good time. And in fact, it's about it's anything but that most of the time. It's not that fun. Again, he has a massive advantage with the majority on council now, that he can really put his stamp on the city. But if it's just doing more of the same, kind of ignoring the folks that need the most help and building lots of expensive condos, I don't know if that's what the city wants, but we'll see. It's up to him.
How responsible do you feel for all of that, given the election campaign and him getting in? Do you cringe? Do you think about, what could I have done better? What could I have done to move the needle to hang on to office or to get my slate in there?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's got to do with money. When you have a lot of rich backers, I come from the New Democrat world. I was elected with Jack Layton, and our fundraising is usually lots of small donations, and I'm pretty proud of. We spent around $1 million in this election, which is a lot, but we were outspent 2 or 3 to 1, and it's very hard, when your opponent can run radio ads over and over and over again, and you can't run any because you don't have the funding. Then it makes it very difficult. So I kind of made an error, I guess, in the sense that I had a very serious policy platform with a plan for the 4 years about what I would be trying to accomplish up against 100 cops, 100 nurses, like very slick marketing, and I think responding to what people were being told was a huge spike in crime and street disorder. And when you look at the stats, there were quite a lot of increases in property crime during COVID, but for example, the homicide rate has been pretty stable. So there was a lot of hype trying to make people scared, and it worked. So unfortunately, it's if you look at the crime stats now, they're exactly the same. So, I mean, and I hope that the public becomes also aware that don't believe the hype is a something that's a common saying. And I think when you have and with the media in flux so much, a lot of the social media spending and advertising had a huge impact. There's there is outside bodies that were getting very involved in Aaron Gunn had this kind of Vancouver is dying video that, of course, the funding for that doesn't get covered by election expenses. It was promoted over and over again, and you get 3 million views about how bad Vancouver is. But people who, and you can kind of, if that's what your main intake of news is, it can make you think that's what's really going on. But if you actually walk around the streets of Vancouver, you find, okay, there has been some change since COVID for sure, but is it a hell on earth, as Pierre Poilievre calls it? I don't think so.
And what do you hope readers take away from the book? What is the call to action here, as you see it?
Well, the call to action is really, in one way, is outside of British Columbia. So I've been people in Toronto, people in Montreal have been contacting me because they are also putting in applications to the federal government to decriminalize drugs. And so this is a bit of a how do you do it outline. So hopefully helping them. And if we get enough pressure nationally, then maybe BC doesn't have to take the risk all on their own, and this could be more of a national program. So that's one thing. The second is there's lots of other drug policy reform that needs to be done. Safer supply, really, I just think of like, a construction worker who gets injured, they're prescribed an opioid to help their ailing back or something, and then their prescription runs out, but they have an addiction. Where do they go? They go to street drugs. They take the street drugs. They're dead. And I mean, I think that's we know what to do. Dr. Bonnie Henry, Dr. Pat Daly here in Vancouver, they all know that safer supply is substituting. We hear a lot about treatment, but the problem is many of these drugs are so strong that 90% of people relapse. So you go in, you get clean for a while, you come out, you relapse, you're back into poison drugs again. And those stats don't lie. That horrible graph that I have in my book about just this up and up and up and up. And these are real people that are dying. Like I had a family member die of an overdose from toxic drugs during COVID. I account in my book many stories of folks, and it just devastates the family, right? And so to think we can turn our heads away from this is wrong. So we need politicians to have political courage, and we did see that at the federal level with Patty Haydu and eventually the Prime Minister. I think, and we need that elsewhere. And I see it elsewhere. I just think Canadians really need to have a real conversation about this and not just kind of try to run away from it, because I think it's just going to get worse. So that's what I hope, is that people take it as a genuine effort to explain how hard it is to change, what needs to happen, and encourage them to take a bit of a leap of faith in a new policy direction.
How do you think this book will land with certain segments of the city? I mean, a lot was said about this book even before it went to press. Now that it's coming out, how do you think it'll land with, say, advocates or other folks on council, other people in the city?
Well, I think the main folks in the advocacy movement understand that it's a step forward and understand limitations, because they've been trying for a very long time. If you think about the supervised consumption site that was put in Vancouver in 2003, I mean, that took years and years and years of effort just to get one site open. This is a policy change right across the whole province. So I do think in the end, the scope is bigger than anything we've ever done. But I do think they're right in terms it doesn't go far enough. So I do hope that this does cause people to reflect. But with drug policy advocates, many of them are just kind of knee deep in pain all day, every day. And, expressing anger is something I would expect. And they're not really the ones that have to do more work. It's the rest of us. If you're working at an overdose prevention site, and all the proceeds from this book go to the Overdose Prevention Society, if you're there every day reviving people and getting paid minimum wage to do that, come on, that person doesn't have to do more. It's the politicians and the families and regular residents of these cities that have to say, this has gotten way out of control, and we've got to do something innovative to try to help save lives. And as Karen Ward, as somebody I quote in my book, says, it has to be more than just being about not being dead. Not being dead should not be the standard we're after. It has to be helping folks have rich and loving lives.
The book is a nice A to Z of your political career, in a sense. Will there be more of that, or are you firmly back at the academy now?
Yeah, I'm really enjoying my time back here at SFU. It's such a nice environment. You're not under attack all day. You actually have room for discuss ideas, and I love students, trying to help them develop careers in policy. But I don't know. I mean, lots of people now. I mean, after the election, people would stop me on the street and say, "Oh, sorry you lost," or like, "Glad you lost." You got a bit of that, and now I'm getting people say, "Oh, will you come back?" And I don't know, talking about it with my family and seeing it did, it does take quite a toll, especially if you're kind of championing things that are not mainstream. So yeah, I'm thinking about it, but but I have some time to think of whether it's municipal or whatever level. But yeah, there have been some inquiries, and there's always a bit of a cooling off period after an election too. And everybody, I think I see this in Canada, everybody wants to give the new guy a chance to do things right, and so do I. I hope Ken Sim and council really kind of start to get their act together and really realize, you got to help the people on the margins here in the city as well as helping regular folks. So I hope they do that. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm still thinking about it, and politics is all about windows. You see, I ran for my first time in office in 2004, and came close but didn't win, and I didn't run again until 2011. So I mean, I'm open to it, but I'm still I love writing. It's my favorite thing, and my wife and I have a desk that we sit on either side of, and she's a writer. She's a political scientist as well. So it's nice. That's a pretty nice way to spend your day.
The name of the book is Decrim, How We Decriminalized Drugs in Vancouver. It's available from Harbor Publishing. My thanks to author Kennedy Stewart.
Thank you.